Plymouth, Massachusetts. And those masts over there are the Mayflower II. The Mayflower II. No one knows what happened exactly with the original Mayflower. There are some places over in England and Europe that claim to have a board or a part from the original ship, but there's no documentation to prove it. This was actually an idea conceived shortly after World War II over in England. A gentleman over there wanted to commemorate America's landing and also to show appreciation for the two countries working together during World War II. This ship was built between 1955 and 1956, using as much traditional methods as possible and using as accurate as data as they could find to replicate the ship as close to possible as it was back in 1620. The ship's made with oak timber, hand-forged nails, hand-sewn sails, hemp ropes, everything. 102 passengers were stationed here in the 'tween decks. It's not a very big area, as you can see, and to think of 102 passengers being basically stationed down here. The main deck was the area for the crew to work, and passengers were not allowed up there very often. And those 102 passengers spent 10 weeks on the voyage, the actual voyage itself crossing the ocean. But once they got there, they had no houses, no shelters on land, so some of them spent additional months here in the ship for shelter. And this is the helm. That stick you see is actually the steering rod. Back when the Mayflower was built, they did not have a wheel. This rod goes down into the between decks and runs the rudder. And this is the captain's office, or quarters. Very small and not much there. This ship's only about 25 feet wide and 106 feet long, tip to tail. It's amazing they built this with the authentic techniques with the oak timbers, hand-forged nails. It's just amazing. And yes, that rear end section of the ship is so narrow you can stand in the middle and touch both sides of the ship at once. It's amazing to think this ship alone is almost 70 years old. Plymouth Rock, where the pilgrims, quote, landed. There was no record of a rock being involved in it at all, until Thomas Faunce in 1741 said that he remembered from the old-timers that they landed on that rock. The community attempted to move the rock up into the city center and broke the rock in half. So for a while the halves were separated until 1880, when both halves were put back together and the date was inscribed on it. This is the Plymouth Plantation. It's a recreation of both the American Indian village, using the techniques that would have been correct for the time period of when the Pilgrims arrived. And then also later on, the buildings and village that the Pilgrims themselves made. The American Indians that had helped the settlers were the Wampanoag tribe. I probably pronounced that wrong. And they taught the Pilgrims how to plant seeds and how to grow crops to help them through the winter. So the American Indians that helped the Pilgrims and the Pilgrims were attacked by neighboring tribes. The Pilgrims decided to build kind of a community building. It acted as a fort to defend them in case of attack, but it also was the meeting house for any governmental type meetings. It acted as the church on Sundays. So it was a true multi-purpose building. And back in those days, with no cranes and no power lifts, I don't think I would have wanted to carry these cannons up to the top here. And this is a reproduction village of what the original community in Plymouth would have looked like. And this would be Leyden Street. This reproduction has been built out of town, but Leyden Street is still an active street in Plymouth and is known in the area as the oldest continuously occupied street in America. As buildings got old or fell into disrepair, a new building was built, and Leyden Street is still an active street. The grist mill was neat. This is a reproduction, but there has been a grist mill on this site since 1636. The original unfortunately burnt down in 1837, and this reproduction was built in 1970, but it is still an active grist mill, and they do grind corn on site. And if you are interested, they do sell the ground corn on site as well at the gift store. Amazing what water power can do. This was a neat display of Thanksgiving over the years. It's amazing how simple things were back at the first Thanksgiving and how elaborate we've made them over the decades and centuries. There were no pies in that first Thanksgiving. In this building, you notice the left side of the building looks different than the right side. The left side is the Richard Sparrow House. It was built around 1640. and is believed to be the oldest still standing residential structure in town. It was closed when we were there, so we weren't able to see inside, but still a neat building. And this is the old 1700s courthouse. This is the town square. This is at the end of Leyden Street. And this is where the original town square was. In fact, that fort/community building we were looking at earlier was believed to be up in this area. And here we have the monument to the forefathers. The cornerstone for this monument was laid in 1859, and it was dedicated in 1889. It's 81 feet tall. The artistry was amazing. And the story behind the monument was fabulous. It talks about the important aspects to the Pilgrim forefathers of faith, morality, law, education, and liberty. Such an amazing monument. But also one that's almost forgotten. We were very appreciative of our time spent there. It is really an amazing piece of art. Well, thank you for coming along on our journey. Stay tuned. There's more to come.